In the mid to late 1990s, many video games have started to transition into 3D animation during the release of consoles like the Nintendo 64, the Sega Dreamcast, and the PlayStation 1. This era has forever changed the concept of gaming, as they have released some of the most revolutionary titles in gaming history. Some of those titles being Super Mario 64, Sonic Adventures 1 and 2, the Crash Bandicoot trilogy, Final Fantasy 7 and 8, Metal Gear Solid, and of course, the topic of today's video, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. 12 years after the franchise's debut, The Legend of Zelda has taken the risky transition into 3D graphics. While some other franchises had a rough transition, this does not seem to be an issue for this franchise. And I don't just mean visually. I also mean this game has a pretty solid story and gameplay. I played this game on the Switch, which before you ask, yes, playing this game with drifting joysticks did in fact prove to be tedious. I know this and Majora's Mask got remastered for the 3DS, but for today's video, I'm just gonna stick to the OG version, since that's the one I played. It may not hold up as well as, say, Twilight Princess, which has been out for almost 20 years? Wow, okay. But yeah, Ocarina of Time is still a solid game in the Zelda franchise that should be played at least once. This video will be divided into 5 sections where I talk about specific parts in this game's story. But with all that said, let's get right into it. It's been an unspecified amount of time since the events of Four Swords, maybe a couple centuries, I don't know. Nintendo doesn't give a shit about the timeline, so why should I? Anyway, the Deku Tree senses a great evil lurking somewhere in Hyrule, so he decides to send the fairy Navi to a child who is not like the other Kokiris. But that's not enough to progress, as this asshole won't let you through without a sword and shield. When that's all said and done, you visit the Deku Tree, who turns out to be the first dungeon in the entire game. You get a slingshot and destroy a spiderweb with your fat ass, and now we get to the first boss of the game, which I'd say is a step up from the little tree guys you've been fighting, at least in terms of a scary factor. Trust me, this is far from the creepiest thing you see in this game. But you eventually kill him the same way you kill most Zelda bosses, by stabbing him in the eye like a complete psychopath, and just like that, the Deku Tree is saved, right? Right? Nope. Sorry kids, he's dead. Turns out Ganondorf is nothing like the other goofball Nintendo villains like, say, Bowser or King Dedede. Nah dude, this Gerudo does not fuck around. We're only like, what, half an hour into the game? And already Ganondorf has a kill count. But anyway, during his final breaths, the Deku Tree asks you to head to Hyrule to meet the Princess of Destiny, the descendant of the goddess— oh wait, that wasn't established back then. My bad. But yeah, the tree dies and you can finally start the game. But not before Saria briefly stops you to give you an ocarina that you will definitely not throw away later. But with all that seriousness out of the way, we get to have some fun exploring the vast Hyrule field. But when you've had enough and just want to progress, you can meet Zelda by Hyrule Castle, just wondering what Ganon's up to, and reveals some lore behind the Triforce. So now you gotta collect some spiritual stones, along with the Ocarina of Time.
He said it! He said it!
Now we head to Death Mountain, the home of the Gorons, where you are assigned to commit mass genocide in Dodongo's cavern, to prove your manliness in order to receive the spiritual stone. After doing that and bombing the shit out of his cavern, you finally confront King Dodongo, where you basically have to throw bombs in his mouth, then hit him with your sword. After a few hits, Daronia rewards you with the Goron's Ruby. Now we head to Zora's domain, and after doing some prerequisites, we have to search for the Zora princess, Rudo, who's inside the Zora's guardian god, Jabu Jabu. So to get to her, we have to feed Jabu Jabu a fish and let him inhale us Kirby style. After carrying Rudo around the whole dungeon, we get to fight Baronade. The trick here is to utilize your boomerang, then start swinging when you see an opening. Afterwards, you receive the Zora's Sapphire, which apparently means Link and Rudo are now engaged? Huh. You know, if I had a nickel every time Link was involved in a romantic relationship with a fish lady, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right? But that doesn't matter. You have all 3 spiritual stones, so now it's time to see Zelda and save the world. Well, at least she gave us the ocarina. Ah, shit. Well, I just killed a bunch of monsters myself, so I can take on an intimidating ginger with a badass looking horse. Oh. Never mind, I concede. Luckily, we are too insignificant for Ganondorf to murder as of now, so now we can fetch the Ocarina of Time, throw out Saria's Ocarina, and learn the Song of Time. With the spiritual stones and the Ocarina of Time in our arsenal, the door of time is as good as opened. And what do we see? Why, none other than the Master Sword. You pick up the sword and... And now the tides have turned. Yes, you've got the Master Sword, but at what cost? Well, you're sealed away for 7 years while Ganondorf conquers Hyrule. So now you have to free the sages to stop him once and for all. But how do you do that? You guessed it, explore more temples and kill more bosses, of course. So you walk outside and realize all hell is broken loose. Remember the fun medieval market area with people dancing around and shit? Well, now it's a barren wasteland, a shell of its former self. Everyone is dead because of you. Kokiri Forest isn't safe either, as it is filled to the brim with bloodthirsty monsters. But to the Forest Temple, after fighting some armed skeletons in what I would say is a very neatly designed dungeon, you run into Ganondorf, saddled up on his badass looking horse. But wait a minute, that's not Ganondorf. No siree, that's Phantom Ganon. The key to beating this boss is to have your bow and arrow ready, until he runs through the painting Mario 64 style. Phantom Ganon occasionally dismounts his horse to have a good old tennis round, but once you defeat him, you reunite with your childhood friend Saria, who turns out to be one of the sages you were searching for. And thanks to your heroic efforts, the Deku Tree is now reborn. Anyway, now we make our way back to Death Mountain, where it is revealed the Gorons are apparently being fed to a dragon named Volvagia, one by one. With all that said, you have to go to the Hellish Fire Temple to free the Gorons and unlock a whole lot of doors. While you are doing so, it turns out Darunia got himself killed, so now you gotta take on this subterranean lava dragon. The key here is to wait until Volvagia pops out of the hole in the ground, then attack his face, when he isn't flying in the air that is. Once you beat him, Darunia ascends to sagehood, and now you can move on to the next temple. Zora's domain is now colder than my no heat having ass basement, as it is literally frozen over. From there we get to the worst temple in the entire game. The Water Temple. Ironic how this one is more hellish than the temple literally dedicated to fire and lava. The constant changing your boots, raising and lowering the water levels, and especially the excessive backtracking really turned things off for me. While we're in the temple, we run into your doppelganger, Dark Link. Huh, Nintendo sure loves to call their doppelganger characters dark, don't they? But there's a light at the end of the tunnel as we finally get to fight this dungeon boss, Morpha. The hookshot is your best bet here. Use it to bring the amoeba on land, then strike him. After that, apparently Ruto also died off screen. So just like in Breath of the Wild, the fish lady dies before Link gets the chance to officially marry her. So we'll never know how this Hylian Zora's ship will turn out. Now we move on to Kakariko Village, which is now on fire. Link and Sheik get their asses kicked by an evil shadow spirit after the well seal was destroyed. The key is to go back in time to the first Thanksgiving to get turkeys off the menu. That's right, we're going back in time to the first Thanksgiving to get turkeys off the menu. That and jump in a well, I guess. Remember when I said this game gets creepier? Well, in there you run into something called a dead hand, which I believe I don't have to go into the nightmare fuel that is this abomination. After defeating him, you receive the Lens of Truth. You then go back to Adult Link's time and use Din's Fire to open the way to the Shadow Temple. As expected from a temple near a graveyard, this one is a spooky themed space filled with traps and this demonic hellspawn you fought in the bottom of the well. When that's all said and done, you get to fight the temple boss Bongo Bongo who, guess what, killed Impa. All you gotta do is attack his hands, then his glowing red eye that is definitely not a weak spot or anything. Once you beat him, it's as you expect, Impa becomes a sage and now you only have one left to pursue. Now that you've had enough of tomb raiding, this said sage resides in an uncharted area, Gerudo Valley. But before we run into her, we head to the thieves' hideout where we have to free a bunch of prisoners and fight Gerudo thieves. Once they're all freed, a thief gives you the whereabouts of her leader, Naburu, who may or may not be the gal we're looking for. But of course, in order to figure that out, she has to die like all the rest. So I don't know if I made it clear by now that I buy the sages are dead theory. But anyway, this is where the lens of truth comes into play, as it knows the way to the spirit temple. Turns out you need to go back in time in order to progress. When you get there, you run into Naburu, who asks you to crawl into this hole to grab the silver gauntlets. After traversing through death traps and monsters, you receive them, and just before you are about to generously give the gauntlets to Naburu, she gets sealed away, so it looks like you get to keep them, I guess. Now back to the future, with gauntlets that actually fit, now you may make your way through a different section of the Spirit Temple. Eventually we make our way to the boss, or I guess I should say bosses, Kome and Kotake, after freeing Naburu from her seal. For like 2 minutes. One twin specializes in fire magic, while the other specializes in ice magic. The key here is to use your shield when one sister shoots a beam, and have it hit the other sister. Eventually they fuse into one. Now what you gotta do is use your shield to block 3 magic attacks, but not a combination of both. This stuns the fused twins, allowing you to deal some damage. Once you defeat them, Naburu ascends the sagehood, and just like that, all the sages are free. And now you can finally face Ganondorf. But first, you have to make a trip to the Temple of Time, where Sheik awaits our presence. If you didn't play Super Smash Bros. Brawl, this may be a shock to you, but it is revealed Sheik was actually Princess Zelda in disguise the whole time. Not just that, but the fact the Triforce separated into 3 parts once Ganondorf got his hands on it. Ganondorf claimed the Triforce of Power, you hold the Triforce of Courage, and the Triforce of Wisdom is wielded by Zelda, the 7th stage. But almost immediately after receiving the Light Arrow, Zelda gets captured. Wait a minute, wouldn't it make sense to capture both Zelda and Link to, you know, guarantee your victory? Knowing Ganondorf, he probably just wants to beat the shit out of Link before getting his Triforce piece. This paves the way to the final dungeon, Ganon's Castle. One by one you have to utilize the sage's abilities to take down the barriers and solve a few final puzzles in the process. And now we go up the stairs as the music gets louder and louder, only to walk into... Huh. You know, not many villains can say they can play their own theme song on the organ. But anyway, this boss here has got to be the most intense tennis match in gaming history. Like with Phantom Ganon, you have to strike Ganondorf's attack while he does the same again and again until it stuns him. Then you shoot him with a light arrow, leaving an opening for you to deal some damage. Rinse and repeat, then you finally defeat the Great Evil King. But it turns out he wants to take the castle with him as it is close to collapsing. We follow Zelda in a Metroid-style evacuation sequence with only 3 minutes on the clock, and of course, you have to slay some enemies along the way. But when it's all said and done, once the castle finally collapses, we think it's over. We think Ganondorf is dead. But wait. This boss. Oh boy. I'll admit this fight was pretty easy. Not just because I played World of Light and Smash Ultimate, but also... yeah, this fight is pretty straightforward. But this boss more than makes up for it in its atmosphere. Especially since this boss is what caused the 3-way split in the Zelda timeline. I saw the gameplay for this boss in the 3DS version, and I'll be honest, the original N64 version is way better. Yeah, I can't see jack shit, but that's why it's so good. This is the middle ground where you add a dark environment, but at the same time, make it possible to see what's going on. The 2014 Godzilla movie, for example, fails that test, because during the final battle, it was too damn dark to see what was going on. Ocarina of Time, on the other hand, passes this test, as it's easy enough to see even in a dark environment. The only lighting you get is from the lightning, the fire, and of course the glow in Ganon's eyes. But at least you can still see what's going on. And hearing Zelda shriek whenever you get hit, as well as the music in the background, only adds up to the tension this boss has to offer. As if losing your Master Sword isn't enough, but you still have some weapons in your arsenal that could be used. Eventually, the fire disappears, giving you the opportunity to pick up the Master Sword. Regardless, the key is to aim for his tail. But once Ganon collapses, Zelda holds him down while you strike the final blow and do what Thor could not. Go for the head. The sages are called and proceed to seal Ganondorf into the void. And now Ganondorf is sealed. All evil is gone forever, and we will never, I mean never, have to worry about Ganondorf ever again. Ha! Yeah, right. He was only gone for like a century or two. But that's a problem for another game. Meanwhile, Zelda uses the Ocarina of Time to send Link back to his time once and for all, and sealing the Master Sword for good. And after the Master Sword is sealed, I couldn't help but notice the sound of the bells in the background, which... Wait a minute. But before we get to Majora's Mask in a future video, let us get to the final verdict. So like I said earlier, this is a pretty solid game. Maybe it didn't age the best, maybe its quality was surpassed by future games like say Twilight Princess, but it was still a great experience. While mine may not be as strong as others, I can see why so many people have fond memories of this game. But yeah, to plug it all in, I rate The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time a 7.5 out of 10. But despite the fact that the game itself doesn't hold up that well, its legacy does. This format would be reused and improved upon in future Zelda games that, in my opinion, would receive higher scores than this one in my book. Now if you'll excuse me, I have to mentally prepare myself to watch Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate and Megamind Rules, since as I'm writing this, I am on the verge of hitting 300 subscribers. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya, chump!